Hello and welcome to this new Android development tutorial. This is part 2 on how to make a PDF reader application for Android. In the previous tutorial, we learned how we can set up an adapter, a list view, and we even set some text to your list view, starting from hello, I am 0 up to hello, I am 99. In this tutorial, we will first start by asking permissions to read the files on the system because we want to be able to read the PDF files and then read them, actually display it to the screen. So if we want to access a special permission like reading and writing files, we're gonna go to our manifest.xml file right here, and before the application tag, we're gonna define the permissions our application will use. The first permission is uses permission and will be read external storage, okay? And the next permission will be uses permission write external storage. Okay, so we only need those two permissions, and we also will set the activity orientation to a screen orientation to portrait, right? So to simplify our lives a lot. So that's how we define a permission, but now we have to ask those permissions at runtime. Okay, so how do we ask those permissions at runtime? So we will go to our main activity.java file, and after the onCreate method, we're gonna override the onResume method. So I'm gonna type at override protected void onResume, okay? And I'll open this and I'll call super.onResume, okay? Great. So what we will do inside the onResume method, we will check if we don't have permissions, we want to request permissions, right? So outside the onResume method, we will create another method which will be a Boolean method that will check, that will be called not permissions, right? So let's do it. So private Boolean not permissions. So if we don't have permissions, we will ask for them. So first of all, we only want to check permissions if we're running Marshmallow or later or newer. Okay, so we're gonna say if build that version that SDK int is greater or equal than build that version code dot m. So if it's greater or equal than Marshmallow, we will check it. If it's not, we will just return false, right? Now, inside the if statement or the if block right here, we're gonna do the following check. We will create, first of all, a way or a loop to request and set the permissions. So we have to define the permissions here as global variables, okay? So we're gonna say private static final string array, and I'll call these permissions. Actually, let's call it the uppercase because this is the final variable. So permissions, I'll set it to, I'll open brackets, of course, with a semicolon, and I'll set these to manifest dot permission dot read external storage, and I'll also set it to manifest dot permission dot write external storage. If we happen to use more than these permissions, we can also specify them here. But since we're only using these two storage related permissions, we just specify these two, right? So now we're gonna also define the permissions count. So we're gonna say private static final int permissions count, and I'll set this to 2 because we have 2 permissions, right? We also have to define a request permission code that will identify our permission request call to the Android API. So to do that, we're gonna say again, private static final int, and I will call it request permissions, and here we have to set it to any number. I'll set it to 1, 2, 3, 4, just as an example. This is just an identifier. Okay, so now inside the not permissions method, we're gonna create an integer inside the if statement. We're gonna create an integer which I will call permission ptr, which is kind of permission pointer, and I'll set it to 0. And I'm gonna say the following: while permission pointer is less than permissions count, we're gonna check if we have each permission in a while loop fashion. So we're gonna say if check self permission, so check self permission, and we will pass our permission, which is permissions at permission pointer. Okay, so if check self permission is different than, and in a new line for readability, I'll say package manager that permission granted. So if it's not granted, we're gonna return true. Return true, which means we don't have permissions, right? And after this if statement, don't forget to increment the permissions pointer. So we're gonna say permissions pointer plus plus. Okay, so basically this is the not permissions method. So to use it, we're gonna go inside the onResume method right here and gonna say if not permissions. So if we don't have permissions, we will request permissions. Okay, so how do we request them? So we're gonna say request permissions, and what we will pass will be permissions as the first parameter, and the second one will be our request permissions code, which is request permissions. Of course, if you want, you can put these variables before the onResume if you want it to look nicer, but it's not a must. In Java, it doesn't matter where you put it. And here, we have a sort of wording right here, and says call requires API level 23, and the current minimum is 16. But we're already checking that API here, so we can just ignore this. So to suppress these, we're gonna say suppress new API annotation, because we are already checking it here. We're only calling it if it's marshmallow or greater, but the lint is not smart enough to know that, but we are. So we set just the suppress lint to suppress that thing. So basically that will ask permissions for us, right? So now if we run the app, let's check if it even works, right? So if we run the app, here we have a dialog that says allow PDF reader to access photos, media, and files on your device. And if you click on deny, it won't work because we need that. But if you click on allow, then it will work, and the app is now has permission granted to start reading files. Okay, so this is how we check for permissions. But now we have to check the result of those permissions, because maybe the user allowed the permission, or maybe the user denied the permission. Okay, so how do we do that? So after the not permissions method, we're gonna override the following method. So you're gonna say at override public void on request permissions result. Okay, and we will open parentheses here, and we're gonna set this to int request code, the first parameter, The second one will be string array, will be permissions. The third parameter will be grant, or actually it's an int array, and this is called grant results, to check the results we got. So we have those three parameters, and inside these we have to call this super method. So we're gonna say super dot on request permissions result, and what we're gonna do here is we're gonna pass the parameters we receive, we're gonna pass to the super method call. So we're gonna say request code as the first one, then we're gonna pass permission, so in the same order we receive, we send it, and grant results. Okay, great. Now we're gonna now check if request code is our request code. So if request code equals request permissions, okay, and we will also check if we don't have empty results. To do that, we're gonna say if grant result dot length is greater than 0. So if those two conditions are true, we're gonna check again if we don't have permissions. We're gonna say if not permissions. So if permissions were denied, what we're gonna do? Well, we want just to close the app and clear the app data. Why do we do this? Maybe it's not the most friendly thing, kind of extreme, but this enables us to be able to keep asking for permissions every time the user opens the app. Kind of a trade-off, but useful actually. So to do this, we will open parentheses and we'll write activity manager. Oh, actually two parentheses, and the inner one we will write activity manager because we will cast this, and outside this it will be this dot get system service, and will be activity service. Okay, and then we're gonna say dot clear activity service. Actually outside this I'm gonna say clear application user data. So that's how we clear the data, and after this we can call recreate just to refresh and close the app and recreate the app, and that's how we do it. And if it's else here, we're gonna say, so that this first if was in the case we don't have permissions. Now in the case we do have permission, so the user has granted permission, we want to tell the system to start loading the data, loading or reading the data, listing the files and all of that. Okay, but we don't have yet a method to do that, so we'll create one outside this thing right here, which will be called void load data. Okay, and now inside this else method right here, we're gonna call load data. Okay, now inside the onResume method right here, if we don't have permissions, we do this, but if we have permissions, we also want to call load data, right? So that's basically how we request permissions, how we get the result of permissions. And now what we have to do is actually load the data. Now where we will store the data, right? So right here, we already have it, which is a list of strings, and that's the variable that will hold our data. We can delete these lines right here, these for loop and this set data, because that was just for testing purposes of the previous tutorial. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna create or make our load data method. So how can we do this? Well, so we go to our load data method. Again, you can make this method private if you want, if it's a good practice. Okay, so first of all, when we load data, we want to clear the previously loaded data because we don't want to write to to list, to duplicate or many times the same repetition and all of that. So we don't want to repeat ourselves, right? So first we're gonna say data.clear to clear all the data and start over. So I'm gonna say file, we will create a new file, of course, don't forget to import the file class. And we will start reading the downloads folder because that's a good place in which we can find PDF files, right? We can extend that to read more than one folder later. But for now, I'm gonna call this file downloads folder. Okay, and I'll set these to environment get external storage public directory. Okay, and inside these I'll pass environment environment dot directory downloads. Okay, so that's how we make our downloads or get the downloads folder. And as you can see, it says it cannot be applied to string. So this is returning a string apparently, so we have to convert these, to transform this into a file. Is that correct? I think so. So environment get external storage public directory, environment.directory downloads. Okay, so we're gonna say new file, and inside that new file we will put this thing right here. Will that fix this? I hope so. No, it doesn't fix it. Okay, let's check what's going on here. Okay, let's delete the file. And here we have this problem, and the suggestion that this gives is cast this to file, but it's still not there. Cannot be applied to string. Environment that get external storage directory cannot be applied to string, but this is returning a file. So I don't know, maybe this is an error of the warning system. So for now we will ignore this, and if it persists we will fix it later. So that's our downloads folder, right? But now we want to list the files of our downloads folder. So how can we do that? So first we're gonna create a file array. So we're gonna say file array, and I'll call it this files, and I'll set this to downloads folder that list files. Okay, great. So now we have the list of the files. We want to know which of those files are PDF files, and if they are PDF files, we want to add that to our data array list. So to do that, we will create a for loop. So we're gonna say for int I equals 0, I less than files dot length I plus plus. So we will be looping the times we find that are less than files dot length. Okay, so here we're gonna say and create a string, and I'll call this string file name, or actually should be file path, but let's just call it file name. And this will be files at I that get absolute path, which will return a string we will store in file name. Now we're gonna check if file name ends with .pdf, we will add it. So this means we have a PDF file, right? So I can say data, okay, data that add file name. Okay, so that's why it's important to clear it first, because we don't want to keep adding the same again and again. Okay, so this is basically how we load data. Okay, So now let's try to run it and check if it works or if it even compiles. And we have an error right here and says get external storage directory cannot be applied to this. Okay, okay. This is kind of strange. This is kind of strange. What happens if I just say get external storage directory? Will that work? Oh, I'm wrong here. So what I have to do, so forget about this. What we have to do is not get external storage directory, is get external storage public directory. So that's the missing word right there. So I'll put this on a new line in order for you to read it better. So this is actually what we want to do. Is the downloads folder is equal to environment dot get external storage public directory, and now we can pass environment dot directory dot downloads. Okay, awesome. Now if we run this, let's check that it doesn't at least crash. So if we run this, we have nothing because we haven't set the data, right? So we have to set data. So after we load data, after the for loop right here, we have to set that data to the adapter. So that is pretty simple. We only say adapter that set data, and we set it to data. Okay? So now we're gonna run the app again to check if the data is being displayed on the application. And as you can see, it's not being displayed, but that's because we don't have PDF files on the app. So let's try to do it without these ends with PDF. Maybe it finds some additional files. So let's comment that, let's run it again and check. And as you can see, here we have some files that the data has kind of figured out, right? So we can say that it's working at some extent. We still need to test it more, but it's working, right? Okay, that's great for now. So we've done permissions, the data, and all of that. Now, what we want to do is, let me see if I can download the PDF file from the internet. Let me see if this emulator has internet access. Let's check. Apparently it hasn't. If it hasn't, then I will fix it for the next tutorial. Let's check. So sometimes we have these problems. It's not very stable, the internet on these devices, so sometimes it just doesn't work right away. Okay, so let's try to continue to improve in this tutorial a bit more about the aesthetics of the app. Okay, so maybe what if we want to do some operations in the files, okay, on the adapter? Maybe we want to change a bit the aesthetic feel of it, okay? So again, let me run the app again to check how it's looking. So here we have these, and it's working, it's looking fine, right? The problem though is that maybe we don't want all of these things right here, because we want maybe a cleaner look that shows only our file. Okay, so we can do this, by the way, with any directory in our phone or Android device. We can change it from downloads to pictures, for example. So okay, maybe I have pictures here, I don't remember, so let's check. So if we change it to pictures, then we have this emulated 0 pictures thing, so we can really change it to whatever we want to change it, right? Okay, so that was just a small demonstration of what we can do with this. And now, what happens if we want to modify a bit the adapter? you know. So instead of setting the whole thing here in set text, we may want to just set the last file, just the file name, right? Yeah, it could be a good idea to just set the file name as text. So get position, then we're gonna say substring begin index, and it will be last index of, actually, um let's create a string. I think if we create a string it would be more efficient. So I'm gonna say string um text, if you want to call it, and this will be set to data that get the value at position. Okay, awesome. So now we're gonna say text, set text to text dot substring, and the index will be text dot last index of the file separator, right, which is last index of, I think a character will work here, this character, right? Yeah, hopefully. So let's try to run this and check how it worked. So if we run it now, it only shows the last kind of a, only the file name, right? And that's a lot better because we don't want to make our kind of cells a lot larger, because it will kind of occupy too much space. So it's better to just do it this way. Now we don't want even these separator there. We don't even want that. So we will increment one on that. So it will be last index of that plus 1. Okay. So if we run it again, we will hopefully have only the file and the extension without the file separator. And now, as you can see, we have our JPEG files right here. Okay, which is awesome. So in the next tutorial, we will download PDFs now that I can fix the internet connection of the emulator. And when we have those PDFs, we will change the directory to PDF, and actually we still can do something else here, right? So what we can do here is we have downloads folder, so we're gonna set this directory to directory downloads, right? And we can also create another folder, right? So we can, do more folders, right? So we can maybe create file document folder, and I'll set this to environment that get external public directory, and will be environment dot directory document. Okay, so for just to list two different folders. And as you can see, now we have our new thing right here, and it says field requires API level 19, and we only have 16. So to fix this, we can just change it here. So 19 is still pretty low, so we can just go here on the Gradle app and change from 16 to 19, just to silence that warning. Kind of the easiest way of doing this. And we click on sync now. If you don't have this sync now button, you can click on this elephant button right here, which will sync Gradle files. And if you go back, then the warning disappears, which is great. Okay, so now we have downloads folder and also documents folder. So we can do all of this again for documents folder. So we will uncomment these ends with PDF because we only really want to do it with PDF. And we will copy these for loop again, right? So, and I will just change files from files to files 2, and here it also be files 2 and files 2. Okay, and instead of downloads folder, we're gonna say documents folder. Oops, documents folder, list file, and yeah, that's basically how we can read from two different files. Again, if we want to make it more visually easier to read, we can put it here. Okay, so the first one is downloads folder, and the second one is documents folder. Both of them search for PDF files and add them to data. And then we set the adapter to the data, right? Yeah. So this is basically how we can read these. And that's it for this video. In the following video, we will actually download the files and import the PDF view library. I hope you enjoyed it, and I see you in the next one. Bye.